Good evening. I'm Noel Latif, President of the Foreign Policy Association, and I am delighted to welcome you to the H.S.H. Sabag Distinguished Lecture on Diplomacy. Permit me first to pay tribute to the late H.S.H. Sabag before I turn the floor over to his daughter and FPA Director, Sana Sabag, to formally introduce our speaker, His Serene Highness Prince Philipp of Liechtenstein. As Senator George Mitchell observed when he launched this lecture series, few individuals have touched more people than H.S.H. Sabag. As a diplomat, as a business leader, and as a philanthropist, his contributions to the betterment of many have been extraordinary. And in the words of the late David Rockefeller, H.S.H. Sabag was a builder of hopes, as well as a builder on a grand scale. His name is synonymous with being a peacemaker and a builder of bridges of understanding. Mr. Rockefeller went on to say, when a man accomplishes so much but claims so little credit, we marvel at his humility. When his generosity reflects such extraordinary civic and social responsibility, we are moved by his selflessness. And when he serves his family, his company, his people, and his values with such conviction, we witness the real meaning of loyalty. Ladies and gentlemen, at the Foreign Policy Association, we salute Sana for her loyalty to her dad and for her vision in establishing this lecture, a living memorial to his memory. Sana, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Your Serene Highnesses, Dame Sackler, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to introduce His Serene Highness Prince Philipp of Liechtenstein, a role model of modern royalty for the 21st century. Prince Philipp is an intellectual, a philanthropist, a leader in the banking community, a statesman, and the perfect encapsulation of what the H.S.H. Sabag Distinguished Lecture Series was created to highlight. As the first generation of the royal family to be born in Liechtenstein, Prince Philipp has been a tireless defender and advocate for his country and Europe. Since 1989, he served as CEO and chairman of LGT, and since 2006, chairman. The LGT Group is the largest family-owned private wealth and asset management group in the world. Prince Philipp has helped establish and increase the size and impact of Liechtenstein as a banking and financial center. His leadership contributed to LGT's reputation as quote unquote, the best private bank for growth strategy and the best private bank for socially responsible investing, which is how the Financial Times and the Banker has described his firm. A student of economics and European history, Prince Philipp serves on many boards, which reflects his diverse interests and deep knowledge. I am honored and pleased to invite His Serene Highness to deliver this evening's lecture in honor of my late father. Prince Philipp, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, First of all, let me thank you for the kind invitation your organization, your association extended to me. Foremost, I would like to make a very special thank you to Sana Sabak, who initiated this invitation. I'm afraid you now have to suffer my speech. I will keep it accordingly as short as possible. Before beginning, let me just say a few words, not so much about myself. Sana already made all sorts of comments, so I leave it like it is. But I will basically speak about Liechtenstein now. It is one of the smallest countries in the world. And as such, it will influence a lot of what I have to say to you this evening. So, for instance, if you are very small, you might often be criticized as not in a not a very fair way. Fairness, as the Brits would say, is having a level playing field. That is, the same rules apply to everybody, independent of its size. Look at certain black lists. Usually you see not very large countries, but small countries on it. But let's stop with that. So what is Liechtenstein? Many of you don't know what it is. It's understandable, we are tiny. You most probably need a very large map to find it, number one. Number two, being so small, I always say we survived since 300 years. We're the only country in Europe which survived 300 years without changing its border. Our two neighbors, Switzerland and Austria, are very happy neighbors. We are so small, I always say that's how we survived. The generals could not find us on the map. We are a small sovereign state in the midst of Europe, around 160 square kilometers, which means about 60 square miles. We are about 38,000 inhabitants, of which 2/3 are Liechtenstein citizens. Liechtenstein is a monarchy with a democratic and parliamentarian constitution. Reading our constitution, you would be maybe surprised by some particularities. So, for instance, being very small, we have two sovereigns. One is the ruling prince, and the other one is the citizen. The citizen is defined as sovereign in the sense that direct democracy allows the citizens, by a referendum initiated by the citizens, to, for instance, change laws, replace or change administration, replace the government or the parliament, or even the prince and the constitution. I don't know there are that many countries who would be like this. The citizens might even have a choice between a republic and a monarchy. Direct democracy is applied also on a municipal level. Being a very large state, we have 11 municipalities. You can see about the size of each municipality. So it's on the municipal level and on the state level we have direct democracy. So with around 1,500 signatures on the state level by citizens of Liechtenstein, the government is obliged to organize a referendum immediately. He only can make a counter-proposal. A majority of voters can therefore not only change laws and directives, it could also ask for new elections, sending the government, and even, as I said, the prince packing. That might lead to a new constitution, for instance, to a republic. Every municipality lives along the same lines of rules and may even, according to our constitution, vote to leave the state of Liechtenstein and, for instance, ask to join Austria and Switzerland, if they won't take him, because the people in these municipalities might find that the services provided by the state are not enjoyable. The government of Liechtenstein consists, large government, of a prime minister and 4 ministers who are nominated by the prince, proposed by the parliament. The prince can veto nominations, laws and decisions, but in the end, The citizen might, if he so wish, have the last word, and as I said, even send the prince packing. Our parliament consists of 25 deputies, reasonable number. We have, like all states, 3 levels of courts, from the lower to the high courts. Interesting, Liechtenstein has no public debt. Unemployment is consistently at around 2.4%. The country ratings by Standard & Poor is a AAA. Only 11 other countries worldwide do have such a high rating. We don't have oil. The GDP is 5.5 billion Swiss francs per year, of which industrial production being the largest contributor with 40%. That is, we're the most highly industrialized country in Europe. Financial services contribute 24%, other services 28%, agriculture 8%, and that's about it. The tax revenue of the state and the 11 municipalities represent a huge amount, 800 million Swiss francs per year, out of which personal income tax contributes 26%, tax on legal entities like enterprises 26%, and VAT about 20%. Per capita, this amounts to a yearly tax of around 22,000 Swiss franc, which, by the way, is higher than the average of other OECD countries. We are not a tax paradise, contrary to what politicians in third countries tell you. A few words about the tax system, if you allow me. We have keep it simple and stupid. Tax system. We have a corporate flat rate tax of 12.5%. The highest rate of personal income tax is 18%. No inheritance tax, no gift tax. Liechtenstein enterprises, mostly industrial enterprises, employ workforces not only in Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein companies own altogether more workplaces outside of Liechtenstein than in Liechtenstein. Also, we have more workplaces in Liechtenstein than inhabitants. 18,000 people from Switzerland and Austria cross our borders every day to work in Liechtenstein. That means we have more workplaces than inhabitants. Liechtenstein is also a member of UN, European Council, WTO, European Economic Area, and so on, and so on. You would find our embassies and official full-time representative offices in more than half a dozen countries, which for a small little country like ours, I repeat again, 28,000 inhabitants, like a small township, it's quite a heavy load, but we carry it easily. In my understanding, and I might not be alone, the huge advantage of Liechtenstein possesses is, apart from direct democracy and a stable institution of a monarchy, is its small size. This leads by definition to greater transparency. You cannot hide, as so to say, everybody knows everybody. The second advantage is fast implementation of rules and laws. Just no place for large and expensive bureaucracy leading to much slowing down. As I always say, survival of the flexible, not the fittest. Now let me come to the more philosophical part of my speech. Sorry, I'll begin now on this. The sovereign citizen. The English lexicon circumscribes the word sovereign, thus unrestricted, autocratic, independent, without obligation of obedience and accountability to anyone. The term accordingly refers to a person who is subject to nobody with a more or less elevated notion of its own standing. We all know about certain examples. The human person is a separate entity with independent substance. In no way can he be merely a function or a property of material processes, social or historical structures. Therefore, one should in fact speak here of the dignity of the individual. An entire world lies within the human person that makes him the culmination of living things on earth. Marxism, however, sees things quite differently. The dignity of the individual is therefore untouchable, as proclaimed in declarations of human rights and constitutions all over the world. Human dignity is inconceivable without freedom, whereupon the term freedom and dignity are closely intertwined, like cogwheels. As Seneca has said, homo homini res sacra est, man is a sacred thing to man. People are willing to fight for their freedom. They may recapture, preserve, love, or defend it. And yet freedom is difficult to define. It is nothing concrete, so it can mean different things to different people. Freedom cannot be positively described, only negatively delineated. It should rather be deemed as a psychological experience. According to the great Austrian philosopher and economist, a leading intellectual of the third generation of the Austrian School of Economics, Ludwig von Mises, who, by the way, also lived at the end of his life in America, freedom is a term describing social relations between participant individuals in a market economy, whereby state hegemony is necessary yet limited because the market economy could not exist otherwise. In everyday language, freedom and coercion are antithetical. This means that many people, more than we would wish to believe, are happy to live with it and be subject to coercion. Also, they're antithetical. The terms are closely linked. No one may be deemed free. That means free from someone else, while that someone else is in turn free to coerce him into something. Therefore, everyone is free to the extent that, in a manner of speaking, he may coerce another person into desisting from coercing him into something. What is essentially concerned is the all but unfathomable complexity and subtlety of interpersonal functions. Laws can only be circumscribed as a small subset, and laws may also bring them out of balance, causing more harm than good. Of course, a state is inconceivable without legislation, regulation, and case laws. Through the inevitable tie between freedom and coercion in any political society, the idea has developed that greater freedom is somehow compatible with greater constraints and regulations. Imperious grasping into the toolbox of regulation as a means to sweep away presumed risks and conflicts is alarmingly on the rise in our time. This dangerous state of affairs leads to intervention in complex rule systems such as those of the market economy, mostly with unforeseen consequences. One particular vivid example of this is fiscal policy, with its ever more complex body of laws, all but incomprehensible to citizens at large. This contradicts not only the concept of law, but hence also the fundamentally important concept of the constitutional state. The justification for such a development whereby ungoverned space melts away like ice in the sunshine is a desire to achieve social justice or satisfy the public interest. Given the extreme vague nature of both those terms, the inevitable result is arbitrary. So what is actually social justice? How and especially by whom is it defined? Which interests warrant particular support? How does it stand in relation to other possible forms of justice? Since Aristotle, there exists a distinction between justitia distributiva, providing for distribution by a person or an institution, and justitia commutativa, retributive justice. Similar with supposed public interest, which all too often is invoked as justification for decisions with far-reaching effects. Ultimately, the development reflects the faithful belief that man should be compelled to happiness and his behavior channeled to the greatest extent possible. This coercion through regulation and legislation makes severe restrictions of personal privacy not only conceivable, but also readily acceptable. There must be a differentiation, one can always say here, between such regulation and legislation as fulfills a purpose and such that is independent of purpose. In other words, rules that government's procedures and processes, for instance, rules for road traffic regulations or rules of playing games with no influence on outcomes, need to be differentiated from regulations and legislations directed at achieving a certain outcome, for instance, achieve social justice through a redistribution. Logically, this must lead to contradiction of the previously stated concept, namely the inherent dignity and freedom of the human person. So how then are citizens to protect themselves and push back against this pervasive development? Democratic forms of government where elected representatives reflect the will of the citizen have politically developed and prevailed in Europe, North America, and elsewhere over the past 2 centuries. However, a more or less increasing distance between citizens and the state must be noted and recognized. It can hardly be denied that a largely self-representing political class, or rather an oligarchy, has emerged. Its mission is to ensure the ever-growing redistribution of goods and minimization of existential risks by welfare state means. Yet there has also been and continue to be, thanks God, certain counterbalancing political developments. Thus, a foundation of direct democracy results not only in a distinct political culture, but also in a more transparent form of state. At this juncture, it is worth returning to Mises' definition of freedom. It holds the term of describing not only social interrelations in market economy between persons with different moral concepts, but also a state hegemony that, through certainly necessary, nonetheless has or should have limitations. A direct democracy is chief to ensuring such limitation on the state. It views the state ultimately as a provider of services rather than a more or less autocratic superior entity which, under premises or pretense of knowing better, largely takes the reins from the hands of the citizen. It might be little known that the political mechanism of referendums and popular initiative developed quickly. You have it in many states, also in Europe, apart from Switzerland and Liechtenstein. For instance, also France has it in its declaration. I forgot about it. Italy also written it down, and even the Republic of Germany has it in some way. A series of economic studies has demonstrated that the referendums and popular initiative influence taxes too. Not only is taxation lower than in representative democracies, public expenditure and debts are also considerably less. I'm coming to the end now. Direct democracy is repeatedly accused of being cumbersome, complicated, slow-moving, and prone to poor decision. A good example, which is always taken, is the Swiss referendum, which took place a few years ago, which forbids to build minarets. Well, might not be the most intelligent decision, but then similar mistakes can just as easily occur in purely parliamentary democracy, or rather, would say, rather more. Only in a direct democracy is the citizen sovereign, and accordingly dubbed as such, named as such also in the Swiss media. Since this bears decisively on political culture, the state's proximity to citizens and their interaction with state administration and politicians necessarily differs from those in representative democracies. Consequently, the idea that citizens should obligingly themselves as bare as possible in order to facilitate state administrative processes is not that easily accepted in direct democracies. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm open to questions if there should be questions.
Well, thank you very much for your remarks, and I might just begin the Q&A with a question about the role of the sovereign citizen in terms of the willingness or lack thereof of some citizens to participate in the process. In some jurisdictions, you are fined if you don't vote. How do you feel about a situation where, as in this country, we have low voter turnout? Should there be some kind of requirement that citizens vote, particularly in national elections?
No, there should be no forcing people to vote. I think people will vote when they feel it is of importance and it makes it, and it changes things. So I think, so I also think that the notion of subsidiarity, written very large in the European Constitution, but you might look for a long time till you find it. Subsidiarity means what? You take decision at the lowest possible level, the nearest level to the citizen. So on the municipal level, before you go to the regional level or whatever, then you feel much more inclined to take responsibilities and to vote.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions. Do we have mics? I think we do have mics. Ma'am, right here.
Yes, I just wondered how globalization has impacted Liechtenstein with a population of 38,000.
You mean, did it impact on us?
Yes, how has it impacted, if at all?
Well, I mean, number one, we are a very small country, so we don't have an interior market. So our biggest market is obviously Switzerland. Second biggest market is Germany. Third biggest market for our industry is the US. We have obviously always been confronted. We use the Swiss franc. So obviously the Swiss franc is rather a stable currency and for the time being a rather expensive currencies. So that simply means for our industries, for our companies, that is with a currency like this, it's like going to the fitness center every morning, which is quite good because then you're fit.
So trends like the migration upwards of population.
Well, I see what you did. I mean, we are part of European Economic Area, like Iceland and Norway, but we got a special agreement by some of the bigger European states, which we are very happy to put that on the table, and we say, thank you very much, yes, okay, we'll take it. We can restrain immigration, so we don't have to take, so there's no completely free movement of people within European Union for us. What nevertheless we do, we take refugees. Compared to the number of our population, it's rather a larger number. Thank you.
Your Highness, our foundation recently actually co-hosted an event with the ambassador of Liechtenstein, titled Diplomacy and Music, really emphasizing the role of culture, especially classical culture, in informing the development of citizens and their the beauty that's inside an individual. Can you comment perhaps a little on the role of culture and education in your nation towards in informing the development of good citizenry?
You mean our educational system? Yes. Well, we have I think comparable to these PISA studies and so on. We are rather well off, I would say. We have some private schools and obviously public schools, primary and secondary, mostly state-run, state-financed. I mean, in the end, it's the citizen who finances it through his taxes. Being a small country, but nevertheless, we have two universities, one being a state-subsidized one, and another a completely private one. And they work quite well. It's small, but efficient. So, and you would see that many people from Liechtenstein go and study in Switzerland or Austria, or also in the States. So, for instance, my nephew, who is now our CEO at our bank, at LGT, he made his MBA in Harvard, some little bit more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, yes. We send our people go wherever they want.
Thank you and good evening. Rick New from CV Star. We're a global company that has a major presence across Europe, as well as Asia and Americas. Two questions, if I may. What is your view of the aftermath of the French election just concluded and the prospect of the German election coming up? Do you foresee a more united or a more disintegrated Europe going forward? Second question is, in the future of Europe, what is the role, in your view, of two world powers, namely the United States and China? Thank you.
Well, I don't know the future either. I would just point out to a number of things. I think the historically speaking, the strength of Europe, and which allows it to develop that fast since the Middle Age, was the competition between states. You had very different lots of states, and people could move between states. If one state wasn't doing well, some citizens just could cross over. That is also a little bit behind our constitution. So if you're not, so I think to put everything on the same level and having some restrictions for people leaving or having them to pay before they leave is contrary to developing an efficient economic and political system. I think that is number one. Now, on the French election, I would say, we'll see. I think he has some good ideas. Will he be able to change some ingrained beliefs, which are very strong in France? So that's 35 hours working week and a few other things. We'll see. I mean, it's an open question. It's difficult to foresee if he'll be able to do it, if he gets in the elections which will take place in a few days, in a few weeks, if he gets the majority, yes, and then if the majority follows him in really making strong reforms, we'll see. Germany, I think we will see elections, they are going well, I think, thanks God. As rather the sort of more liberal-minded CDU, CSU. thanks God. So altogether, I'm not all too pessimistic. One thing, nevertheless, is also a thing which always comes back to one's mind. As I said before this, we don't have a public debt. Now you look at certain countries, when you look at their implicit debt, which means their public debt plus the debt the state has towards its own citizen, of whom he has taken money out of their wages to put into a fund to fund their pension system. If you put the two things together and then calculate present value, you come to astonishing figures of debt. That is rather worrying. China, I think, developed very nicely. I think it's a good chance they will open up more and more, hopefully so. I think in today's world, because people can connect through the internet and with all the new technologies, it becomes very difficult for a government, for a state, or for a party to take full control. You can always escape and open up and see what happens somewhere else. So China is in this process of, can they open really up or not? How are they going to manage? I'm staying optimistic. I think they're very pragmatic people in a certain way. So we'll see how that works out. Again, I don't know.
Sir, my question is, how independent can your hegemonic power be in this globalized world? Making it more clear, how independent can your military power and your sovereign power be in this globalized world if there is any attack or based on anything like that?
You're probably speaking from the US, because we don't have any army. The Deutsche Wehrmacht stopped at our border. I think they were afraid. So we stayed neutral like Switzerland all over those years. I think, of course, I wouldn't be that so much worried about China. Much more worried, obviously, as all of you would probably are or would be, is about North Korea. You just don't know what passes through his head. I think that is certainly a difficult thing to appreciate and to see. I think we need ways to defend ourselves. And if you're a very big state, then obviously there you are. If you're very small, strangely enough, you never come to the idea of invading your neighbor, which is most of the time 100 times larger.
Do you have any concerns about Russia?
Well, it's getting poorer and poorer. And it's still living, I think, in an old system in a certain way. How worrying it is, I think, as long as Mr. Putin is able to hold things together, it should be all right. I think he's a very pragmatic person. He can be certainly rather be forceful, not to say something else. As long as he's there, it's all right. If he should go away and you have different factions in there, oligarchs and some of his former colleagues from the services, which have their own little way of doing things with people they don't like, then it becomes a little bit more dangerous. So something to observe, but how that will go, difficult to say.
Question right over here.
Good evening, Your Serene Highness. I'm Laura Flores, Ambassador of Panama to the United Nations. From being from a small country, also prone to being blacklisted, I understand your plight and your point about that, except we are paradise, just not a tax paradise. In the context of the Sustainable Development Agenda that we have been discussing at the UN, Panama has put on the table the topic of tax incentives and how a middle-income country like us can ensure that while we adjust to the increasingly costly standards, transparency, compliance, especially coming from OECD countries, how can we continue to attract foreign direct investment and stay competitive? So I was wondering if you had any recipe for success.
I don't know if I have recipes as such. I'm great myself, always great thinking that one of the best tax system is the most simplest one. The simpler it gets, the easier it gets to understand, and you can't cheat. So flat rate tax is basically the best, because you can't give gifts as a politician to third parties without having everyone to pay for it. So you understand. So I think that is certainly an important thing, to have a tax system which treats everyone as equally as possible. I think the second thing, obviously, is to have a very stable court jurisdictional system, law system, fiscal system, which treats everyone in a fair way and very transparent. The transparency is extremely important. What I'm not so much for is what today is there, we have to live with it, is this automatic exchange of information in all cases. I think because in some countries that can lead to quite dangerous situations, as you can imagine. No? So I think give information, yes. If a country comes to you, I mean, like in Liechtenstein, we have this automatic exchange of information with many countries now. For other countries, countries will have to come and show why they're asking the questions. And then one goes before, then can answer the question, but it has to be a reason behind it. If it's not having paid taxes, yes, then you show the thing to them, yes. But this is a political background and nothing to do with tax, nothing to do with any corrupt or other system. I think people have the right of having their privacy. They have to pay their tax. You have to make sure of this, quite sure, yeah. But privacy is important.
Cluster of questions over here. Why don't we just pass the microphone down to the three gentlemen here?
Thank you very much, Your Highness, for visiting us and sharing about your beautiful country. It seems Liechtenstein is an amazing country and very well economically developed. But I'm concerned, are there any issues or challenges that Liechtenstein faces in terms of economic development? Thank you.
Well, up to now, I mean, as I said, we certainly have up to now we have done, I think, quite well, as you have explained to you. I think obviously the Swiss franc is making things not that easy for Liechtenstein companies. I mean, to export things, the whole thing in Swiss francs or value of Swiss franc. But as I said, I mean, that is certainly a thing, but you have to manage it, and it seems we managed all sorts of companies, all sorts of activities. For me, much more important is that we have this level playing field. You know, that if you make a judgment on one country, you make very clear on what this judgment is based. And if you're not prepared to do that, then it becomes not a very nice environment. But up to now, I think it's all right. We used to have that. I think now that is gone. I think other governments have seen that we work well that we have high standards. We also controlled as such our standards, so that at a certain time could have been, so to say, a thing where big countries just were looking for some culprits, you know, the elephant looking for a mouse, but that is gone. So what are the things today? I think we are not more or less constrained by the developments, economic and the political developments than other countries, or like our two neighbors, or Germany.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Hüsnü Yüksel. During your speech, you mentioned about the hegemonic, and you mentioned about survival of the state, and also my question is, after Russia's annexation with the Crimea, and then the current conflict between United States and Asia, and are we heading towards the new nuclear conflict one more time after the Cold War?
Well,
what is your view about that? Thank you.
I wouldn't know it either. I do not hope so that we're running for a nuclear war. I think that would be the end of the world. I think today one is becoming much more careful probably than one used to be. Just thinking back on the Cuba crisis many years ago, I mean, that was a difficult moment probably. I think today those sort of things might be managed, or the possibility to manage them better. So I mean, things can obviously happen. I mean, some mistakes, and somebody pushes some wrong buttons. I hope not. Is it possible? I do not know all the technology behind it. But yes, I think it's always something to keep in mind. But I think most countries realize if they push the wrong button, somebody else will push also some buttons, and then they're gone too. So it's not it's not a game where you can win, you can only lose. And I think, I would guess that everyone is more or less rational about it. I hope so.
Time for 2 more questions, right over here. Sure. You want to do it over there?
Should I?
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I have one question. I would be really interested in your opinion about the Brexit and the negotiations that are about to start in June. So you said that Liechtenstein is member of the EEA, yet you have some control about freedom of movement and immigration. So you gave us a reason that Liechtenstein is a very small country. So do you think that Theresa May probably and Boris Johnson might be able to get a deal for the UK that has like similar ramifications, that they gain access or maintain access to the single market, yet gain some control over immigration and freedom of movement? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think, number one, we are very different countries, obviously. I mean, we are tiny, and why we got this special agreement from the EU about free movement of people within EU was Germany and some other countries were sort of, I would guess, sort of more or less worried that the very rich people would all move to Liechtenstein and then pay their tax. You just heard what one pays taxes in Liechtenstein, and so they lose a part of their income. So they were quite happy to say, well, why not? You can restrain them. And we said, yes, we are quite happy about it, no problem. So I think that is, so we have to begin with quite a different starting point. I would guess that Great Britain will negotiate, and negotiation will obviously raise all sorts of questions within EU. I mean, there's just this question which was raised a few weeks ago about how much UK has to pay to EU. There were some numbers put forward between 60 and 100 billion pounds. Well, you can imagine that Theresa May say, that's not worth it, we're certainly not going to pay 80 billion, nor 60, nor 40, nor 30. And then, whatever the thing is, it will be negotiations. But who is going to take this missing, whatever the missing is? Is it going to be Germany alone? No. Is it going to be everyone? Can you see people like Hungary, Slovakia, Czech, Croatia, which have a much lower per capita income than Germany paying for this? So I think we will see a very tough negotiation with very different interests at different levels from different people. And I wouldn't be surprised that the Brits would know how to play with this. Thank you.
Utku Texas from the United Nations. Your Highness, thank you very much for a very inspiring lecture. If I understood you correctly, direct democracy allows the citizen in Liechtenstein to switch between even monarchy and republic. So my question is, has Liechtenstein ever switched between these two systems in its history? And if not, what, in your opinion, is the most dramatic way in which the citizen has used its power to change things in Liechtenstein? Thank you.
Okay, I think the Liechtenstein people are also very pragmatic. As I said at the beginning, I think I said so, the head of state has to pay everything out of his own pocket. So for a citizen, it's rather a good argument, and the family has created its wealth outside of Liechtenstein, so there's no conflicts of interest. So this money comes from outside, and this is family money. So for the citizen, it's rather attractive. Number two, there's this balance of power. As I said, the prince has some veto power, but he uses it very carefully. My father, who was head of state from 1938 till the beginning of the 80s, only used it once. My brother didn't use it at all. So one is very careful. One is always sitting down and discussing things. So I think, so this question was never raised. And I think it's because we can live with it. We as a country and as people who have a low profile sort of philosophy, don't show off, being simple, being very near to each other. We all went to school there in the township, in the little village. So it's, you know, there are lots of mechanism in there which keep things very manageable and very near to each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Royal Highness. I think you've pretty much answered the question I was going to ask. I was going to ask how people from Liechtenstein feel about you having the veto power.
Pardon me? I didn't quite understand.
Oh, you didn't hear me? Okay. I was wondering what the people of Liechtenstein feel about you having the veto power, and how often you've had to use
prince,
it.
as I said, the prince has the veto power, but the veto power, he can veto everything. But again, I think in the end, the people can, or the government can then ask for a referendum. Also, the government could ask for a referendum and saying, the prince said no, we put it before the people. If the people then vote yes instead of no, like the prince, then you have an issue, and it might end like this, that the prince might be asked to pack, and it might be then the crown prince taking over, the hereditary prince, or, as I said, the people might even decide to have a republic. I think it's rather unlikely, but okay.
Well, on that note, thank you very much.